Today we're talking about polyurethane versus varnish versus lacquer. And we're talking about which one is the best choice for your upcoming project. Now, one of these dries very, very rapidly. The other two dry a lot slower. One of them is very, very toxic, but is used in commercial enterprises quite a bit. The other, much less toxic and perhaps a little bit easier to apply. So we're gonna go through it all. Stay tuned and we'll dive in.
Today, we're gonna look at 3 finishes that you might come across or want to use, and we'll talk about their similarities and we'll talk about their differences. As always, if you like what you see, please hit the like button and be sure and subscribe so we can let you know when we have new content. We're going to talk about polyurethane, we're going to talk about varnish, and we're going to talk about lacquer. So let's start by saying that in general, the polyurethane and the varnish are in the same class of finish. They are made by taking a resin and an oil, and you sort of cook those two together and mix them, and you come up with the raw finish. And polyurethane is a type of varnish, and this is Spar Varnish, which is another type of varnish. There are other types of varnish as well, but what you need to know about varnish in general is that it is the most durable class of finish that you can put on your projects. It lasts a long time, it's scratch resistant, and it holds up either indoors or outdoors depending on the type you select. Lacquer is a completely different technology, and it's made, it was invented after World War I, and it's a highly toxic, highly flammable chemical base. And so when you use lacquer, there are 2 things to know about lacquer. Generally, you want to spray lacquer on because it dries nearly instantly. Also, you need to wear protective equipment so that you don't breathe any of the vapor in the process of applying the finish. And you also have to keep it away from open flame, and that's important if you have a water heater, for instance, that has a pilot light, or a furnace that has a pilot light. You want to keep lacquer away from that because it is potentially explosive in that environment. Lacquer is not nearly as durable as the varnish family, which includes both Spar Varnish and polyurethane. So it's not as durable. The real advantage of lacquer is how quickly it goes on and how quickly it dries. So it became the go-to finish for commercial furniture manufacturers because they can spray a coat of lacquer and let it dry for 20 minutes, maybe 30, depending on how hot and humid it is. And then they can go back and spray another coat. So you can build up multiple coats of lacquer relatively quickly. Also, it dries so quickly that particles in the atmosphere that normally take time to settle into your finish and produce imperfections, by the time they settle on lacquer, the lacquer is already dry and they don't stick to lacquer. Another thing about lacquer is it's quite forgiving in terms of if the finish doesn't look like you want it to look, you can come back and put another coat of lacquer on, because when you put a new coat on top of an old coat, the new coat melts the old coat and evens out the finish and really bonds very well. However, as I said, it's not nearly as durable. For instance, if you put a drink that's in a glass that sweats directly on a project that's been finished with lacquer, it will produce a ring, and if it's there long enough, you may have difficulty ever getting it out. Varnish, on the other hand, is extremely durable, but it's at the other end of the spectrum on drying. It takes a long time to dry, and so you have to allow typically 12 to 24 hours between coats to allow the previous coat to sufficiently dry before it will properly accept the next coat. Now, Spar Varnish uses one kind of resin called an alkyd resin, and it makes it very flexible. And that's very important for outdoor finishes. And it's also extremely resistant to ultraviolet light from the sun. So if you were finishing a boat and you wanted a clear finish, Spar Varnish would be the finish of choice. Polyurethane, on the other hand, is made with a different resin, and it's not as flexible, but it's harder, so it can stand up better to scratches than Spar Varnish. And there are other types of varnish as well, with different types of resins as their base. So if you're doing some specialized finish project, you want to be sure that you learn the differences between the classes of varnish. There's a couple of books on the market that I particularly like and I can recommend to you. The one I like the best is called Understanding Wood Finishing by Bob Flexner, and I'll put a link in the show notes for this so that you can pick it up if you want to. The other really good book is called Great Wood Finishes by Jeff Jewett. Both of these guys are experts in wood finishes, and there's a lot of information in here. So let's recap. We're comparing varnish with polyurethane, and then comparing those with lacquer. As I said previously, the technology and the base chemicals in polyurethane and varnish are really the same or very similar. The characteristics are that it dries slowly, so you have to allow 8 to 12 to perhaps 24 hours in between coats. You can put it on easily with a brush, and there's plenty of time to do that. You don't have to be in a hurry. And multiple coats gives you the strongest finish that you can get. Lacquer is very quick and very toxic. You generally have to spray it, which can mean either using a spray can or a sprayer that you buy at home, like HVLP. You can also buy brushing lacquer. This is a brushing lacquer. You can put it on with a brush, but you really have to be quick, and it has to be on a small project because of how rapidly it dries. So lacquer dries very rapidly, which makes it of great interest to commercial furniture makers. And it's not as durable as varnish, and it is susceptible to water damage and scratching. Well, we have a swing set here. It's made of wood, and we're going to put it outside. And so it would be a good idea, it's a good idea to finish the wood, put something on it to protect it. We don't want it to crack, and we want to reduce the weathering, or at least slow down the weathering, which will take place outside in this climate in the sunshine. And we've said that the best kind of finish to use in that circumstance, where you're going to be outside and where you're going to sit in the sun, is a varnish. And in particular, the best variety is Spar Varnish, because it's very ultraviolet resistant and it works very well. So we have a quart of Spar Varnish here. It's oil-based. So we just remove the lid. Just take a stir stick of some sort and give it some stir, because you want it to be evenly distributed. That should do it. Now, since this is an outdoor project that we're really not as interested in the appearance as we are interested in the durability and the ease and quickness of putting it on. So we're going to use one of these disposable brushes that you can buy in a big box store. They're very inexpensive. Since this is not a water-based finish where you can just clean it with soap and water, you would have to use mineral spirits or paint thinner to clean your brush, and that takes some effort and some time. We're not going to do that. All we're going to do is apply it, and then we're just going to dispose of this disposable brush. So let's begin. I'm going to begin out here away from this chair to begin with, because I don't want to drop drops of varnish onto this chair particularly, although it wouldn't be a catastrophe. And of course, you just get the brush initially fairly dampened, and then you just simply begin to brush it on. Now, I don't know how good the close-up will be on the filming, but you'll see that there are brush marks that I'm leaving on this, and that's because of the poor quality of the brush. But you'll also see that there are machining marks on the wood. So the brush marks are actually going to be less noticeable than the machining marks. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put it on, and then just in a back and forth motion extend where I am further down the board. I will be able to do 3 sides of this, and then I'm going to lay it out across these 2 pieces of log here and let it partially dry, and then once it's dried we'll have to flip it and do the other side. And it's not clear until we've done this process whether or not 1 coat will be sufficient or whether we'll want to put a second coat on. So if you like the content, please hit the like button, and please subscribe so that we can keep you informed about new content.